Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with a video all about some of my favorite YA contemporary reads. I know I've filmed this exact video before, but it's basically like over a year old at this point, and in the amount of time since I filmed that video and now, I have read so many more contemporary books, and I have loved so many of them, and I thought it was about time that I share some more of them with you because I feel like I don't talk about these books as often as like maybe fantasy books, which I read all the time and talk about all the time. But I was looking back on my old video and I noticed that there were so few books on that list because I had read so few contemporaries, because YA contemporary used to be like one of my least favorite genres or categories to read from, just because I hadn't liked many of the ones that I'd read in the past, so I just didn't reach for it very often. But then I started just getting way more into it, especially this year, and this year alone I have just read so many incredible books, and now I just want to share them all with you. So I have, I think, like 12 books to recommend. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about each of them, but I just wanted to put together like this list of some of my all-time favorite ones, and this is going to be like a continuation on that first video. So if I don't mention a book that you think is one of my favorite contemporaries and it's not on this list, it probably is in my other video. I'm just not mentioning it here because I've already talked about it there. So I'll leave that video linked on the screen as well as down below if you want to go and watch it and hear about some of my other favorites, but these are my favorites since I've made that. So without any further ado, let's get into talking about all of these wonderful YA contemporaries. The first book I want to mention is one that I read this year and fell completely in love with. This one's a little bit different than your traditional YA contemporary because it is actually magical realism, but I still do consider it part of the contemporary genre because it is very much within that genre, and that is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. I've mentioned this book a couple of times now on my channel. I've actually done a reading vlog where I read part of this book and you can see like my emotions as I'm going through it. Definitely cried a bit while reading it, but from the moment that I read it, from the moment that I started reading it, I knew it was going to be one of my all-time favorite contemporaries, even one of my all-time favorite books. If you don't know what this book is about, it's about this girl whose mother dies by suicide, and then she believes that her mother has turned into a bird, which plays into the magical realism aspect. And then she ends up traveling to Taiwan to meet her maternal grandparents, which she's never met before, and find out more about her mother's side of the family. And it's a fantastic, absolutely heartbreaking, but extremely beautiful, beautiful book. Obviously, the subject matter is pretty intense, so if suicide is something that you are not comfortable reading about right now, then I would definitely put this off. But otherwise, I cannot recommend this book enough. The writing is lush and lyrical, and I've said this countless times every single time I've mentioned the book, but there is something about it that is so extremely hopeful, which is something that a book about suicide I feel like usually doesn't do. It doesn't give me that feeling, but this one absolutely did, and I have so much love for it because of that. So yeah, it is an exceptional story that I feel like deserves far more love, so I highly, highly recommend trying this one out. The next book on my list is another one that I read this year and fell completely in love with around the same time that I actually read The Astonishing Color of After, and that is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book is very unique in that it's a story told in verse. So basically it's kind of like a collection of poems that all come together to complete one full story. I'll show you inside. It's like actual like poems, so some of them are much shorter, some of them are much longer, but it's such an exceptional story. It's about a teenage girl growing up in Harlem and being a part of a very like religious family, and the pressures that come with that and the experiences you have as a teenager, the feelings that come up during those years. She feels very misunderstood and pressured to be a specific way based on what her mother wants her to be and what the church expects her to be, but then she finds an outlet for this through poetry, and that's where she is able to be creative and be herself and express herself, and it's absolutely exceptional. It's truly unlike any other contemporary I've ever read, and I highly, highly recommend it to anyone. I definitely put a content warning on this because she does have a very emotionally and physically abusive parent, so just be aware of that before you go into the book, but it's absolutely exceptional. I can't say that enough. Like, the story is unlike anything else I've ever read. The way that it's crafted and put together is also beautiful, and I just want to read more and more books in verse because I love this format and I loved everything about it. So I highly, highly recommend picking this one up. The next book on my list is a story that I think is really fun and funny and something that is more lighthearted if you're looking for that type of a contemporary, but still has that kind of deeper message to it, and that is Down and Across by Arvin Ahmedi. This is a book about a boy named Scott who does not have any grit, and he is looking for that grit. If you don't know, grit is basically like the drive and motivation to do something, go after something, be passionate about something. And as a teenager, he just doesn't feel that right now. But he ends up going to DC because he's supposed to go to this internship, but he ends up leaving the internship to go and meet with this professor who teaches about grit because he wants to know more about it and how he can find his. Along the way, he ends up meeting some other characters, he makes some friends, he has some adventures. And for me, this was a really, really great story to read because this is one of the first books I've ever read, if not the first and only book I've ever read, I think so, with a Iranian main character, because Scott was born in the US and his parents were born in Iran, which is the exact same situation as my family, so it was really relatable in a lot of ways. But it was just great because there are like parts of it that are written in Farsi, like using the English alphabet so I could actually understand it, and there are little things that he talks about and alludes to when it comes to his family and his relationship with his parents that are just so Iranian and Persian. Like, if you are, you get that. And it was so great being able to read a book that like had those little things in it and just being able to relate on such a deep like cultural level. So yeah, this was just a fantastic book, and I just really, really enjoyed the overall story as well. I loved Scott's entire arc that he goes through from beginning to end. He grows a lot as a character and he learns a lot, and this is definitely the type of book that I think would be the perfect thing to read in high school. Like, I wish I had had this book in high school because I feel like I would have felt far more seen, and I related a lot to Scott's struggle even now in my life. I just thought it was a very, very nice story, very like complete and well-rounded, and I appreciated a lot for that, and I think it's another one that's very much underrated and I highly recommend. The next book on my list is by an author that I'm surprised it took me so long to read. Like, I read this book last year and I still haven't read any of his other books, and I don't know why because I loved this one, but that is History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. Adam Silvera, as many of you probably know, is a very popular YA contemporary author. He has written a number of books, all of which I'm very excited to read, but History Is All You Left Me is the only one I've read so far. But I very much enjoyed this story and it was absolutely heartbreaking. If you don't know what this book is about, it's basically about this boy named Griffin who recently lost his best friend slash ex-boyfriend in a drowning accident, and this loss has completely devastated him, and so it's very much a story about grief and Griffin going through this grief. Griffin also has OCD, and that's something that they talk about a lot in this story, and he is struggling with that as well, accompanied with the grief, and he meets another person along the way that he kind of has feelings for too, and everything becomes messy and complicated and he doesn't know how to deal with all of his feelings. And like I said, it's such a devastating story because obviously it's very, very sad, but I absolutely love the way that he talks about grief and handles it. And while thankfully I've never had to experience the same type of loss that Griffin experiences in this book, there was just something about it that still felt so personal, even though, like I said, I haven't experienced this type of loss. And I think that's just a testament to the writing of the story and the way that it's all put together. But it's absolutely beautiful, and if you're looking for a heartbreaking story that will make you sob, then I highly recommend giving this one a try because it is well worth it. The next book on my list is another one that I actually read very, very recently. It's probably now one of my all-time favorite books just because it came to me at exactly the right moment in my life, which is how I feel about a lot of my favorite contemporaries. It came to me at the right moment and it has had such a profound impact on me, and I know I'm going to reread it over and over and over again. And that book is Wintergirls by Laurie Halse Anderson. This book is about a girl named Leah whose best friend Cassie has recently passed away as a result of her eating disorder. Cassie was bulimic and Leah is anorexic, and the story is about eating disorders. It's about Leah's experiences, about her grief and the loss that she's experienced. She has a very complicated relationship with her family. She has obviously a complicated relationship with this friend that she's lost, and she's grieving, but she's also experiencing an immense amount of pain as a result of her anorexia. It's very difficult for me to talk about this book, but it's truly one of the best things I have ever read in my entire life. Even if I take out anything that has to do with like me personally relating to it in any sort of way, just in an objective sense, this book is so well written, it's unbelievable. It is a contemporary, but in the way that it's written, it feels almost magical, and there's just this quality to the writing, and there's a way that she describes certain emotions and senses and feelings and the thoughts going through Leah's head where it almost feels like magic, and not in like the happy good sense of magic, in a very dark, dark way. And it's very much intentional because I think that sometimes when you have these types of thoughts going through your head, it's very difficult to express them in a realistic way. They feel almost fake, but they are so real to you that the only way to express them is through some sort of otherworldly description. And I think all of that makes this book incredibly unique and special and important when it comes to talking about mental illness because of the way that it describes it. So yeah, because of that, I'm just in awe of the writing in this story, as well as the story, of course, because that's also exceptional. I highly, highly recommend this. Obviously, huge content warning for eating disorders, self-harm, mental illness. Just be aware of it before you go into it, but I loved this book and I will love it forever. The next book on my list is Dear Martin by Nick Stone. This book follows the story of this boy named Justice who is an exceptional honor student. He's set to go to Yale. He goes to a very prestigious like private school, but he is black in a school of kids who are mostly white. And he one day has a run-in with the police and they end up handcuffing him even though he's done absolutely nothing wrong. And then he's trying to come to terms with this. He's trying to understand why the world is like this, why people treat him differently just because of his race, and understand a way to cope with this and also do something about it while also being a high school teenager. So what he does is start writing letters to Martin Luther King Jr. just as a way to kind of release some of the emotions that he's experiencing, and then it ends up becoming like kind of a school project for him. And it's such an incredible, incredible story. It's very short, it's really not that long, but it feels like so much happens in all of that time, and that's because so much does, especially emotionally. Those are my favorite type of contemporaries, if you haven't been able to tell throughout the rest of this video. I really, really like deep, emotional, usually sad contemporaries. That's my thing. I've gotten into a few more happy ones recently, but I really like the sad ones, but I like the sad ones with hopeful endings, and this is definitely one of those. So yeah, it's obviously a very powerful and important read, and something that I think like high school teenagers should be reading this book, because this is the perfect type of thing to read in high school. It's the perfect thing to read at any point in your life, but in high school, this book would have been perfect, I think, for so many people. So many of us would have benefited from it, and I can't recommend it enough. So definitely check this one out if it's something that interests you. The next book on my list is one that I like just finished reading the entire series, actually, because it's a contemporary series, which is very, very rare. But I read it so recently. I didn't even think that I was necessarily going to like this book, but I decided to pick it up because it has a movie coming out, and then I fell completely in love, and now it's genuinely one of my favorite books I've ever read. And that is To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. I know I'm like the last person to read this book because everyone read this book because it came out in like 2014. It's been around for so long. Everyone's read the whole series. I did not even think I was gonna like it. I never thought I was gonna read it just because, like I said before, I was not into YA contemporary very much, especially like romancy contemporaries. And this is definitely a romance contemporary, but I just never even thought about it until I found out that the movie was coming out, and the movie looked cute. And I was like, okay, I want to read the book before I watch the movie, so I have to read the book. And then I read it. And now I just want to read it over and over and over and over again, because genuinely no book I have ever read in my entire life makes me this happy. If you happen to not know what it's basically about this girl named Lara Jean who every single time she ever had a crush on a boy in middle school, she would like write them a love letter and then save the letters and put them in this hat box that her mom gave her. And she would just like keep them all for herself, and it was a way of like releasing her emotions and her feelings. But then one day these letters end up getting mailed out to all of those boys, and then they all find out that she had a crush on them, and then that starts to complicate a lot of things. And I know that the premise sounds like kind of cheesy, and yeah, it is a little bit cheesy, but honestly, this book is so much more like emotional and deep and powerful than I ever expected it to be. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with reading just like a cheesy, light, happy book, because this is also that, but there was so much to it that I found so relatable, and I didn't expect to find that in it at all. I was just expecting to just have a fun, good time, and I did, but I also cried because it was just so meaningful to me, even on like a very personal level, because of the relationship that Lara Jean has with her sisters, and I just loved that aspect of the story so, so much. That accompanied with the way that she talks about being a high school girl and being a teenager in high school was also really relatable. It was just so, so true to my high school experience, and I loved it so much. Like every time I talk about this book, I can't help but smile because that's just how genuinely happy it makes me. And I literally binged the entire trilogy in 2 days because I couldn't stop reading them because they were just that good. So yeah, if you're looking for a happy, fun, romancy contemporary that's also very deep, very meaningful, please pick this up. It's so good. Even if you thought like me that you wouldn't really like it because this wasn't really your thing, just like get out of that, step out of that. I have learned from me, You will like this book. It's so good. The next book on my list is one that I read last year, and it was basically like right after I filmed my first contemporary recommendation video that I read this book, and I was really mad because it couldn't be in that video because I'd already filmed it, but I can mention it now, and it still stands as one of my all-time favorite books, and that book is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This book is about this girl named Eliza who is a very popular webcomic artist online. So she has this very, very famous webcomic called Monstrous Sea that has like millions of followers and millions of readers. So she has like this whole online life, but in person she doesn't have too many friends in high school. She mostly has her online friends that she talks to, and she also deals with anxiety. But then one day this boy ends up moving to her school, who she then finds out is one of the most popular fanfiction writers of her webcomic, because people write fanfic about her webcomic, and she knows who he is, but he has no idea who she is. So that causes some problems for them. In terms of the way that this book talks about anxiety, it's one of my favorite books I've ever read because it's so relatable and accurate, especially to my own experience. She struggles with her anxiety in the general sense, but also in respect to having her online life, which is something that I've also experienced. And at the time that I read this, it was a very significant thing in my life and something that I was very much struggling with. So it came to me at exactly the right time too. But I love the characters. I love how well fleshed out they are. I love the relationship that she has with her family, the relationship she has with all of her friends. This is something that honestly, like now talking about it, I just want to read it again because it's been a while and I don't remember all the little details anymore. And I just want to go back and reread the entire thing, mark up the whole thing, and like mark my favorite passages and quotes. But yeah, it's a beautiful book, and I always compare it to Fangirl because to me this is a lot like Fangirl because it's a very similar type of story dynamic, but in my opinion it's much better. I also love Fangirl. It's in my other video, but I highly, highly recommend this one if you liked that story too, because I definitely think you'll love this one as well. The next book I have to recommend is another one that I think is a very underrated read, and I feel like nobody has read this on BookTube. Like I literally haven't heard anyone talk about it except me, and I need other people to read it because I need to talk about it with people. But that is Love and Other Carnivorous Plants by Florence Gonzalez. This book is about this girl named Danny who ends up dropping out of her second semester at Harvard because she enters treatment for an eating disorder. She then goes through recovery, but then the story actually takes place post her recovery after she's come back home, and she's staying home for the rest of this summer, and then she's going to go back to school in the fall, and she reconnects with one of her old friends, and she's just trying to put her life back together and also kind of figure out what she wants to do with her life. It's about being an overachiever in a time where you can't overachieve because of extenuating circumstances, and I cannot even express how much I love this book because of how much I could relate to it. It's obviously sad because there are very tragic things that happen in the story and the subject matter is pretty difficult, but it's also really, really funny at times because our main character is very flawed. She has a lot of problems. She is not perfect by any means, but she also has a very dark sense of humor, and I love her sense of humor because it's very me, and I just really, really enjoyed the story because of that. Like, it made me laugh, but it also made me cry, and anytime a book can do that to me, I know that I really love it. It also has a really great romance because the main character, she doesn't label herself as anything, but she is into girls and guys, and she ends up falling for this girl who was at her treatment center, and then she ends up meeting her after she has come out of treatment and seeing her again, and then realizing she has like very serious feelings for her, and then that starts to develop from there. And yeah, just everything about this story is just so good and so well done. And this is another one of those books that came to me at like, I don't even think you can say like the exact right moment in my life. Like, there was no other way for it to be more perfect. Like, the timing was exceptional. It was like the gods literally just like came down and put this book into my hands at exactly the right second when I needed it. So it's just everything to me. I love this story. I want more people to read it because I feel like nobody has read it. And yeah, I cannot recommend it enough. And the very last book that I have to recommend on my list is one that I've talked about countless times. I have a review for this, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. But that book is, of course, Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This is, I think, hands down my favorite contemporary of all time, quite possibly like my favorite book. I don't want to say it's my favorite book. It's one of my favorite books. I don't have a favorite book anymore at this point, but it's truly one of the best books I've ever read for me on a very personal level. It's another book that talks about mental illness. It's about a character named Asa Holmes who struggles with OCD and an anxiety disorder, and it's about her life as she is struggling through, I would say, one of the worst times of dealing with her mental illness. I've marked it up endlessly. I've read it like 3 times at this point, I think. I have a full, very, very long non-spoiler book review for it, so I'm really not going to spend too much more time talking about it right now, but it's absolutely breathtaking. Such a well-crafted story about mental illness, and I've never read another book in my entire life that talks about mental illness as well as this story does, and as realistically as this story does. I have finally gotten to the point where I can talk about it without crying, which is like progress. But yeah, of course, highly recommend. My favorite John Green book. Just please, if you can read it, please do. Alright, so there you all have it. That is it for my list of some more of my favorite YA contemporary books. I think at the beginning of this I said there were 12, but there are actually just 10 on my list. I miscounted. But please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I mentioned on this list. What are your thoughts on any of them? Are any of these your favorites as well? Or if you have any other contemporary recommendations for me, please leave those in the comments down below as well. I'm really into reading contemporary right now, and it's pretty much all I want to read, so I would absolutely love to hear any of your recommendations. But that is it for this video. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, all of my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!